At about 4:25 in the afternoon on November 25, 1941, 3 torpedoes hit the port side of a British battleship in the eastern Mediterranean. The sea looked calm, but the impact threw up one huge column of water. Men on deck felt the ship jump under their boots. A second blast followed, then a third, so close together they sounded like one long crack. On a nearby ship, a cameraman kept filming, hands steady only because he did not have time to think. The battleship began to roll, and everyone watching understood there would not be enough minutes. The ship was HMS Barham, a Queen Elizabeth-class battleship built in the First World War and still carrying the weight of the old Navy. She was massive, over 30,000 tons of steel, with big 15-inch guns meant to smash enemy ships from miles away. By late 1941, she served with Britain's Mediterranean fleet, moving out of Alexandria to protect convoys and hunt Axis supply routes to North Africa. She was not new, and she was not fast like a destroyer, but she still mattered. A battleship was a symbol, and it was also a floating city. On board were more than 1,000 men who ate, slept, worked, and waited inside a tight maze of metal. They sailed in a war that had already taught hard lessons. Battleships could still kill, but they were also targets. Aircraft and submarines did not need to match a battleship gun for gun. They only needed one good hit in the right place. In the Mediterranean, the British tried to keep Malta alive, keep supply lines open, and stop fuel and weapons from reaching German and Italian forces in Libya. The sea was crowded with danger. Mines, bombers, and U-boats turned simple movement into a gamble. A ship could do everything right and still be found. On that late November afternoon, Barham sailed as part of a battleship squadron with destroyers screening ahead, as if that screen could catch every threat hiding under the surface. On Barham that day, routine had filled the hours before the attack. Men stood watches, checked equipment, cleaned steel, and handled small repairs that never ended. The ship's life depended on boring tasks done correctly. In the mess spaces, some sailors ate quick meals and drank tea because a warm mug helped steady the nerves. Others wrote short letters because letters were one of the few things that made a distant home feel real. Some men rested in cramped bunks below decks, trying to sleep through engine noise and heat. Nobody moved through a battleship without hearing the ship itself, the constant hum of machinery and the faint vibration in the deck plates. The feeling of danger still sat in the background. Even when the sea looked empty, sailors knew it could be watched. A submarine did not announce itself, it waited. Lookouts scanned the water for periscopes and wakes, but the human eye missed what it did not expect. The destroyer screen used sonar, but sonar gave contacts that were not always trusted. False alarms were common, and war forced people to make fast choices about what to believe. That afternoon, the German submarine U-331 got into position. She slipped through the destroyer screen and closed to very short range. Inside the U-boat, men worked in heat and stale air, whispering range and angle. Then the order came to fire. 4 torpedoes left the bow tubes. At least 3 ran true, cutting through the water toward Barham's side. On Barham, a few men later said they saw pale streaks on the surface, like fast lines in the sea. There was no time to turn. A battleship did not pivot. She needed space and seconds she did not have. The torpedoes struck amidships on the port side, so close together they kicked up a single towering splash. Steel plates buckled, compartments flooded, power failed in places. The ship began to list to port, at first like a heavy lean, then like a roll that would not stop. On HMS Valiant, the battleship following behind, officers heard the blasts and felt the shock carry across the water. The officer of the watch ordered the helm hard over to avoid Barham and keep the ships clear of each other. Smoke rose fast. A huge dark cloud spread and started to hide Barham from view, but something else appeared in the middle of the confusion. A submarine broke the surface, close enough for men to see the shape and the tower. Valiant's captain tried to turn and ram the U-boat. He ordered full speed and hard rudder, but the ship's helm had already been thrown the other way, and a battleship could not change direction quickly. The submarine slipped down again, diving only yards away, so close that Valiant's gunners struggled to aim. The anti-aircraft guns fired, But the angle was wrong and the rounds went over the tower. The moment passed in under a minute and the U-boat was gone. The men on Valiant had seen their enemy at point-blank range and still could not stop him. On Barham, the list kept growing. Below decks, flooding turned corridors into traps, doors jammed, lights died. Men in engine rooms and boiler rooms fought to follow damage control orders, but water moved faster than plans. The ship's own weight worked against her as she leaned. On deck, sailors ran toward higher points, trying to stay above the waterline as it shifted under them. Some jumped early, fearing they would be dragged down if they waited. Others clung to rails, refusing to leave the ship until they were forced. The camera kept rolling from a distance. It captured the terrible clarity of it. A huge battleship, wounded but still moving forward, tilted further and further, with men visible on the deck as small dark shapes. She did not sink slowly by the bow the way people imagined in calm stories. She rolled over. The sea poured into openings that were never meant to face downward. Funnels took in water. The ship hung at an angle for a moment that felt too long, as if the ocean was deciding what to do with her. Then the after part of Barham erupted. The magazine explosion was sudden and violent, a deep blast that threw smoke, flame, and debris into the air. The cloud turned black and brown, thick enough to hide parts of the ship. Pieces of metal flew out and splashed down across the surface. Men in the water saw it coming and could not get away from it. Some were injured by debris. Others were pulled under by the ship's movement and never came back up. From the first torpedo hits to Barham's disappearance, only a few minutes passed. Accounts later put it at just over 4 minutes. That speed was part of what made the sinking so brutal. There was no long window for calm evacuation. There was only shock, quick choices, and water rising where it should not have been. After the ship vanished, the sea was covered in floating wreckage, oil, and men calling for help. The smell changed. It was fuel oil, smoke, and salt water mixed together. Survivors fought to stay afloat, coughing and spitting oil from their mouths. Some had burns. Some had broken limbs from being thrown or crushed. Many were in shock, not fully understanding the ship was gone. Destroyers and other escorts moved in, careful of submarines that might still be near. Boats were lowered. Lines were thrown. Men were hauled up by their arms and collars because there was no gentle way to do it. Some survivors were too weak to climb and had to be pulled like cargo. Others could not let go of wreckage even when hands reached for them. Sailors on the rescue ships worked fast because cold water and oil stole strength quickly. Not everyone could be saved. Some men disappeared while others watched. A head would bob once, twice, then sink. A hand would rise, then vanish. There were cases where survivors later said they were followed by floating bodies in their wake because thick oil moved like a sheet on the water. The rescue effort continued anyway because stopping meant choosing who lived. When the count was finally made, the numbers were heavy. More than 1,300 officers and men had been aboard Barham. Only 449 survived. 862 died, including Captain Geoffrey Cook. An admiral, Sir Henry Pridham-Whipple, survived, but survival did not look like victory. It looked like men wrapped in blankets, faces blackened with oil, eyes wide and blank, bodies shaking from cold and fear. The questions started immediately. How did a submarine get through a destroyer screen and reach torpedo range of a battleship squadron? Why had sonar contact been dismissed? Why were the hits so close together? Some answers were simple and painful. A submarine only needed a short opening, and war at sea produced openings all the time. A screen reduced risk, but it never removed it. Human judgment failed under pressure, and the sea punished mistakes without mercy. There was also the question of the explosion. The torpedoes did not just sink Barham by flooding. The magazine explosion turned a sinking into a violent end. In battleships, ammunition was stored deep inside, protected by armor and strict safety rules. But a ship rolling and flooding could break those protections. Fires, shock, and shifting structure could lead to a catastrophic blast. Barham's final eruption was the part people could not forget, and the part the film made impossible to deny. The film itself became part of the story in a grim way. The sinking had been captured clearly, but the British did not release the footage right away. They kept the loss secret for morale, Families were told, but the public was not given the full truth. Sailors were warned not to speak. In wartime Britain, rumors still spread, but official silence held for a long time. The ship had vanished in minutes, and then her disappearance was covered with more silence, as if silence could make the loss smaller. Barham's sinking also fit into a wider pattern of naval warfare that people struggled to accept. Battleships had once been the main power at sea. By 1941, they were still dangerous, but they were no longer untouchable. Submarines and aircraft could kill them without warning, and often without giving the crew a fair chance to fight back. In Barham's case, there was no gunnery duel, no heroic exchange of broadsides, and no last stand against a visible enemy. There were only underwater tracks and 3 hard impacts that a ship that size could not escape. For the Royal Navy, the loss was more than a wreck on the seabed. It was a blow to strength and confidence in a sea where Britain could not afford to lose ships easily. It also forced changes in procedure and thinking, even if those changes came slowly and under pressure. Destroyer screens, zigzag patterns, and sonar discipline all mattered more when one missed contact could erase a battleship in minutes. In the years after the war, the film remained one of the most haunting pieces of naval footage ever captured. People watched it and focused on the explosion, because explosions were easy to understand as an ending. But the real ending was the oil-covered sea afterward, the missing men, and the survivors who had to live with what they saw. Many carried it quietly for the rest of their lives, because words did not fit the speed and violence of those minutes. HMS Barham did not die in a famous battle that filled history books with tactics and triumph. She died in a short, brutal ambush off the Egyptian coast in late afternoon light, with a camera watching from the next ship. The men aboard did not all see the torpedoes, but enough of them sensed what was coming to run, climb, and jump like people escaping a collapsing building. And the men who did see the submarine could not turn fast enough to stop it. The last unsettling truth was simple. If a battleship could be erased that quickly, then almost any ship could. Steel training and pride did not matter when the sea was full of hidden enemies, and the margin for error was measured in seconds. The film ended with smoke and empty water, but the war kept going, and the next torpedoes were already moving somewhere else, towards someone who would also have only a few minutes to understand what was happening.